Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone to our event today. My name is Muhammad Abu Nimr, a professor here at the School of International Service and the Peace and Conflict Resolution, Human Rights and Intercultural Communication. I am delighted and excited to take the role of moderator for this panel. It is an important conversation that we've been looking forward to have it on this campus and also really be able to delve into some of these issues that the panel is trying to focus on. So thank you all for joining us today, and especially for our 5 guests. The 5th one is on the way, for them taking the time to share with us their experiences and also lessons that they have learned that might be also for help for all of us, faculty and students. The event is sponsored by Peace and Human Rights and Intercultural Communication Department that conveys 3 units or 3 degrees. Abdulaziz Saeed, the chair for Peace and Conflict Resolution, and the Farsi chair for Peace as well. And also the Ethnographies of Empire. It's a research cluster for faculty as well as students here on campus. Thank you for all those who sponsor this. I am the moderator, so I'm really just the vehicle for this. The true engine behind this whole operation is Professor Tazrina Sajjad, who's really put this together for many months, working tirelessly on this. So thank you again, Tazrina. The theme of the panel is extremely relevant to our students and faculty who teach international relations and principles of diplomacy. Our school is among the regional schools that prepare and groom future diplomats and public service officers. So this is very important for us to have such conversation here. In the field of peace and conflict resolution, ethics and human rights and intercultural communication, we emphasize the positionality of the student and the scholar in their work. Knowing where you stand is the first step to being able to promote and build sustainable and just peace. That's what we teach them. So positionality is very important in this conversation and also one of the themes of this panel. But beyond learning the facts on the ground about any conflict, we urge the students to fully engage in the analysis of conflict and make informed decisions that guide their analysis and recommendation for policy change or a change in general. However, one of the most common debates in our class and between scholars ourselves is the issue of neutrality and impartiality, or I should say the illusion of neutrality and impartiality. As a third party, when do we take a decision to support justice and be guided by our values and ethical consideration? Should we be doing that or not? What are your red lines? We keep asking the students when you work with parties in disputes. What are the costs of taking a stand as a mediator or facilitator in a conflict? And we have seen so many mediators and facilitators and negotiators who are refusing to take stand on this recent conflict or genocide, one should say, since October last year. These are not abstract questions. Everyone who engages in conflict resolution and peacemaking have to face them at some point. For many of us, the war in Gaza and the genocidal campaign and what has unfolded since October last year have tested our capacity to express solidarity, negotiate new professional boundaries, and discover in our community and beyond our allies and those who scared to take a stand or those who endorsed and justify war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and genocidal campaign, and even demanded for many of us to continue our business as usual. Many of us felt and continue to struggle through these battles in our educational institute and even in our personal lives. Tonight, we have 5 brave individuals who took a stand and publicly denounced the role that our political leaders and government officials have been playing in the war since October last year. There are many others who took stand and expressed their dissent from the official policy, who wanted to be with us but did not work for them for many reasons. Hala Reharet, career diplomat, Stacy Gilbert, senior advisor, State Department, Alexander Smith, senior advisor on gender and maternal health as well in the USAID, and also other people. There are more people. I don't want to bore you with reading all the name, so we can focus on our dear guests here who agreed to be with us. We asked them to elicit their reflection on 4 areas which typical for our conversation. One is the motivation, why and what motivated you to take such a stand against the war and against the US involvement. And the second is the ethics of public service. What was the moment in this war that you have decided to take such a stand and to go publicly with it as well? Third one, so far, you have taken the decision and acted upon it. What are the consequences, professional, personal, that you have faced? And that's a cost that everyone has to pay once they take a stand. Our 4th theme that we suggested to examine or explore: what is the main advice that you can offer to our students and others who might be interested in public service and may face such ethical and moral dilemma and challenges in their work? And since we asked them that, I've added another theme. If you can share with us any initiative, any project, anything that you have been engaged in since you made that decision. And welcome, Mariam. So thank you again. We'll start with Josh Paul, who resigned from the State Department in October 23. Due to his disagreement with Biden administration decision to rush lethal military assistance to Israel in the context of its war on Gaza. He previously spent over 11 years working as a director of the Bureau for Political Military Affairs, which is responsible for U.S. defense diplomacy, security assistance, and arms transfer. He previously worked on security sector reform in both Iraq and the West Bank, with additional roles in the Office of Secretary of Defense, U.S. Army, and military legislative assistance for a member of the U.S. House Armed Service Committee. Josh grew up between London and New York and holds a master's degree from universities of Georgetown, St. Andrews in Scotland, and he's currently a non-resident fellow at the organization Democracy of the Arab World now, DAWN, and a recipient of the 23 Callaway Award of Civic Courage. So we'll start with Josh, and then we'll move by order to the next. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Abunimmer. Thank you, American University. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible. We are here to talk about Dissent. We are also, of course, here to talk about Gaza and the events of the last year that have left so many tens of thousands of innocents killed. And I think it is important, even as we talk about Dissent, as we offer our thoughts, particularly to the students among you, as you begin your careers, that we not lose sight of what it is that we dissented over and what continues to be the genocide in Gaza. So on the topic of dissent, first of all, let me start by saying, and I said already, thank you to American University, but you know, it's nice to know that adversaries can find common space. And so as a Georgetown graduate speaking here at SIS, it's good to be here. It's also good to be here with my 4 colleagues here. And as you know, we are 5 out of 12 who have publicly spoken up. As you will hear, each of us had our own reasons to do so and did so from our own positions based on what we were seeing, based on what we were experiencing, based on our own personal backgrounds and narratives. I didn't know anyone else at this table a year ago. And we are now, I would say, family as much as anything else, very close in our experience. And first of all, I just wanted to say to them that, you know, I was thinking a couple of days ago, October 25th just passed, and I know we're looking ahead to Halloween, but October 25th is St. Crispin's Day, and those of you who know your Shakespeare will know that as he wrote, gentlemen in England now abed will think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap when they speak those who fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day. And there is a bond that we have built, and I think that it is a bond that we have built through adversity, but also through the sense that we have done something that we can be proud of and that we hope will make a difference, and that we are committed to continuing to push to make a difference with. So with that said, very briefly on my own story, the reason I'm here and the reason I resigned was that I was working in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs in the State Department, which, as many of you will be aware, the way the US government is organized, that is the part of the US government that is primarily responsible for security assistance and for arms transfers. And as a director in that bureau, part of my responsibilities included being one of those who has to approve major arms transfers to partners around the world. And so I had a very direct connection to what was happening in the wake of October 7th, where Israel was coming in requesting a whole variety of lethal weaponry. At the same time, we could see how that lethal weaponry was being used against the people of Gaza, the devastating effect it was having. People say to me that I resigned early. You left so early. I didn't know, obviously, first of all, that we would be here over a year later and this would still be going on. But what I did know by October 17th of 2023, which was the day that I handed in my resignation, October 18th was my last day in the office, was that 3,500 people had already been killed. That a huge amount of Gaza's infrastructure had already been devastated, and that the government of Israel was saying that we will impose a siege on Gaza, no food, no water, no electricity. And so it was already very clear at that point. And I think because I had that direct nexus, because I was in that chain where I was responsible for signing off on major arms transfers, it was clear to me, first of all, that this was not something that I could support, that I could be a part of. It was also clear to me that there was no space for debate around this when I tried to raise my concerns with senior officials. There was absolutely no interest in having this discussion. It was simply, how quickly can we approve these transfers? How quickly can we get these weapons out the door? And so between the lack of debate and the, scale and the scope of the devastation that was unfolding, I felt I had to resign. I do want to say, before I pass the mic, that doesn't have to be the case for everyone. And, just in the last 24 hours, actually, I've had two separate conversations with people who remain in government. One of them is and obviously I have to be careful about what I say here. One of them is someone who is active in organizing. They are part of a group called Feds United for Peace, which is a group of current civil servants across the US government who have been organizing to raise their voices externally. You can find them on LinkedIn, you can find them on Instagram, and also to help each other internally, to provide a community when someone experiences, for example, retaliation for raising concerns, for expressing dissent. They are there to support each other, to channel that report or that concern in the right channels within the US government or to the congressional staff or members or whatever it might be. And so that is certainly one role that people can play, even if you are not working on these issues, is to be a community of support for others who may be working on these issues or who are finding it difficult for their own reasons. Another person I spoke to in the last 24 hours was someone who is not part of any organized group, will not be part of any organized group, will not speak to the media or to Congress about the issues that they are working on, which do have a direct nexus to the conflict, and is struggling with it very much, but has also, we had this conversation and said, look, I don't think, I'm junior, I'm not going to be able to shift anything, but I want to create a historical record. I think it's important that history shows exactly what the US government knew, when it knew it, how much it knew it, how it knew it. And that is my contribution here. I'm going to be collecting that record and making sure that it is there when it is available to the public. And so that's another way, right? Another form of dissent, another form of standing up for what is right. There are many other forms that we can talk about, and I think the same applies, of course, on college campuses around the country. I've been to many of them, over 24 in the last year, and seen a lot of really brave students who are finding their own ways to stand up on this, whether it is through pushing their campuses for divestment, their administrations for divestment, whether it is sitting in encampments, whether it is writing as student journalists about what is happening, whether it is sitting in student government and representing the views of the students to the administrations, whether it is simply speaking up in classrooms and making sure that other perspectives are heard. I think for each of us, there is a role depending on where we sit, what our interest is, what our connection is. And I really look forward to having that discussion with all of you today about how each of us has that role. Thank you. Professor Abu Nimr is asking me if I want to add anything on consequences. So I think each of us will have our own commentary on that. I think each of us has had different experiences. I do think that, as you will hear, part of that, frankly, in this society, in this country in which we live, has to do with what you look like. I have not faced any, personal attacks that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm not actually on Twitter, so I'm sure there are plenty of personal attacks out there. But they can rant and rave all they want. But beyond that, nothing. I have been, on the contrary, when I left, I had a backup plan, which was, well, I'm never going to be able to work in government again, but I've done overseas security sector reform work before and still in touch with a lot of people who do consulting in that sector. So I will find myself a job in Central Asia or in Latin America or something, and speak up on this issue for a couple of weeks and then go off and be very happy doing something completely unrelated. And obviously that hasn't been the case. I've spent over a year now advocating on this issue. And what I want to say is that in that time, not only have I personally not other than, being out of a job and that's of my own choosing, not felt consequences, but rather I've made so many new friends, new relationships, been brought into so many new communities, and it has been a very moving and very heartwarming, even in the midst of all this pain, experience for me. So those are the consequences that I have experienced, but I do recognize that others have not had necessarily as smooth a path, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again, Josh. We'll go to Miriam Hassanein, was previously a Biden-Harris administration political appointee at the Department of Interior. Inspired by the student movement, Hassanein resigned from the Biden-Harris administration on July 2nd, 2024, in opposition to the administration's handling of Israel and Gaza and the harm caused to the Palestinians. She's the youngest to resign so far, and the first Muslim appointee to resign. Before joining the administration, Hassanein worked on Capitol Hill in a democratic member office, where she handled a diverse set of issues as part of her portfolio, including environmental, energy, religious liberty, and international human rights. She also has experience working with advocacy organization and the political campaign. Hassanein graduated from Arizona State University with a BS in Justice Studies and minor in Social Welfare. Thank you, Miriam. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us here. I think that when we received the invitation to speak at a university, and also the question about public service and whatnot, I began to think about what motivated me to go into public service. And as Dr. said, I my major was in justice studies. So it was really centered on social justice. And I then really kind of was trying to figure out what career path I can take that would allow me to pursue justice, to pursue, that pathway. And I felt that at a certain point, I felt that, okay, public policy in the realm of government and politics can be a vehicle for progress and justice. And I don't want to say that I don't feel that way now. I do think it can be, but I also learned that, I think that there are so many people like me in government, people who are sitting here who wanted and continue to want to do good, but I think that there are barriers in place, and I want to actually bring up a point that Tadic said a couple months ago, that it's not necessarily a policy problem, it's a politics problem, because the research and the proposals for a better policy are there. It's really kind of the political barriers that are in place. But I do want to add a caveat to that it's not necessarily like me saying that, okay, we should abandon the political system completely and not, not participate, not do our part, because I think that there really has to be an all hands approach. I think that there has to be pressure placed in all levels of government. There has to be pressure placed through, calls for divestment at universities and community organizing. So I really think that there are a lot of ways each of us can advocate for a better approach on this. And then I want to also mention that kind of pivoting a little bit. So I think that there are a lot of young faces in the room. And I want to say, I think that we as younger generation will often hear that you'll change your opinion on things when you grow up. You'll realize maybe the impracticality of your ideals. And I really want to say, I think that there's kind of two things to that. I think that you can recognize the challenges in place. You shouldn't be blind to that there are challenges to maybe achieve the ideals you want to achieve. But I don't think that I think at the same time you kind of have to keep that motivation alive, or else, really there won't be a change. If we just kind of succumb to this, like, oh, our political system has always been like this. It's always been supportive of Israel. We've always, had this strong allyship. If we hold on to that idea and therefore are like, oh, why bother to do anything or invest so much energy and time into this, then obviously I don't think that things will change. So I think it's important to, even in the face of hard challenges and a long historical record of our country not being on the right side of this, it's important to keep that kind of to stray away from defeatism, I would say. And then I wanted to go back to the kind of public service piece. So I know it's going to sound very obvious, but I think that when I was looking into my career path, I didn't, I guess, realize what it meant fully when you're working for an elected official. Like, I didn't realize, the sort of, trying to think of how to best word this. Like, I think that you have to recognize that you are taking on all of their policy positions and stances and opinions. And I know that sounds obvious, but I think when I was, searching for a job, I felt like, okay, I'm a Democrat. So if I'm working for a Democrat, then we're gonna be aligned. I feel good about it. But there are certain things that are deal breakers. There are certain things that should be deal breakers. I think that you're not going to be 100% aligned with your principal and who you work for, but there are, issues that maybe are less consequential than others. And I think that for me personally, I just felt like in any way supporting the mass displacement and killing of Palestinians was not something I was okay with that in any sense. And I think that there's maybe there's an idea that I'm going to speak to the Biden-Harris administration in particular, but there's an idea that they are doing really good in X, Y, Z, and therefore, we should hold on to our support for them. And I'm not saying don't not support them, but I'm saying I think that there are certain issues that really shouldn't be overlooked, and we should really keep that at the forefront, and we should keep our solidarity at the forefront. So yeah, I think that that's, something to consider when you're looking to work for an elected official. And I'll say too, I think that it's important when you're in those spaces to dissent, but also to recognize that there are certain limits to your dissent. I think if you do what you can do and you reach kind of a point where you're like, okay, I don't think it's actually going to affect change in this space. That's how I felt. I didn't feel like me being inside the government was going to affect change, but I thought maybe outside of it, I could affect some change. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think that that's kind of those are my parting words on that. Yeah, I wouldn't, so I think that on a personal level, most of my family and friends are aligned with me. So I didn't have, that sort of personal, those personal consequences as I think others may have. But I will say, I don't think it's a consequence per se, but I think now I kind of recognize when I'm looking, for my next career move, I'm recognizing the associations with things I don't want to be associated with. So it's very limiting in a sense, I would say. So I think that that's maybe a consequence, but I also think I think it's a lesson I learned is to be far more kind of selective with what I choose to do with my time, because I do think, our careers and what we spend a lot of our time doing and our labor is really something that, we should make sure aligns with our personal values. So yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a consequence per se. But.
Thank you. I think you frame it as an opportunity. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you again. We'll go to our third speaker. Okay. Harrison Mann is a former U.S. Army major and executive officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, Middle East Affairs Regional Center, who resigned in the protest of his office's support for Israel during its campaign in Gaza. He previously served as a Middle East all-source intelligence analyst and led a crisis cell coordinating intelligence support for Ukraine. And prior to his DIA work, he worked at the U.S. Embassy in Tunis, the Office of Security Cooperation, Central Command as well, and led the Army Civil Affairs team combating regional smuggling under the U.S. Naval Force as Central Command as well in Bahrain. Harrison began his Army career as an infantry officer. He speaks Arabic and received a BA from the College of William and Mary and a Master in Public Administration from Harvard University, the John F. K. School of Government. أهلا وسهلا تفضل. That was a test in Arabic.
I knew I was going to have to answer for that. Yeah, so first of all, thanks, Mariam, for your wise words. Thanks, Josh, for the introduction. Thank you, Professor Abu Nimer. And especially thanks to Professor Sajjad, who, just so y'all know, she was like the first person who reached out to me, I think almost after I resigned, has been planning this for almost 6 months now. So she was first to get to us. So I'll try and touch on the main points here in the time that I have without running over. Just so to explain the position I was in, that title Professor Abu Nimer read off on October 7th, I was working functionally as the assistant to an intelligence official who was in charge of all Middle East related analysis for the Pentagon and for the government at large. And that includes not just informing our policymakers, but developing assessments that we share with our partners, Five Eye, NATO, regional partners. And we have a very close intel sharing relationship with Israel. So from October 7th on, I was not only, I think, had a extra awareness of what was happening in Gaza and what the extent of U.S. cooperation with Israel was, because I had a great vantage point to that because of where I work. I could also see how we were treating it inside the intel community and inside my own office, which was kind of business as usual. And you mentioned my bio. I previously worked on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. The ethos there was, hey, it's all hands on deck, help the ally, basically give them whatever they want. This is a priority, no questions asked, get them in the fight. I did that for Ukraine. It felt pretty good, but we were doing it for Israel with really no discussion or even acknowledgement of the really awful human cost that we were seeing. And we were seeing it not just the way that I think you all were when you went on the news or went on Twitter and saw these really disturbing videos and photos, but it was in our own intel reporting. It was in our own various streams coming from State Department, coming from CIA, coming from all the sources that you'd imagine might have an idea about this. And so it was really kind of confusing and then frustrating and then upsetting to see the report in the morning that said, okay, this many thousand people were killed, in the past 2 weeks. And we're pretty sure that they're going to hit this hospital next week. And then we go on to discuss, okay, well, here's what we're going to work with on this topic or that to improve their awareness and support, at least indirectly, their ability to continue fighting this war, which at the time I thought it was a very bloody war. Now it's clearly a genocide. And this was all in October. And there were a series of moments, some were very publicized, some were not, where I thought, okay, well, surely it's going to be a big deal if they blow up this hospital. Surely it's going to be a big deal if they tell us in advance that they're very suspicious Hamas is at this hospital and they're signaling to us that they're going to do something about it, and we're not going to let this stand. And a series of those moments passed. And at the same time, this is now, I think Josh talked about people who are being record keepers of this. At about the 1 year mark of October 7th, a lot of people started letting out the emails that they'd saved up. I think maybe for their own sake. But one of those emails that I just saw a couple of weeks ago was a senior Pentagon official who was in charge of the Middle East there, basically the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. There's an email from her, I think, on October 15th saying basically, hey, I think the Israelis are doing war crimes. Does anybody at the NSC care about this? That was somebody that we worked for in my office, but that was never, ever communicated down to us. The reflections of that we saw were internal policies that said, basically, if anybody has concerns that the cooperation we're doing is going to be linked to or contribute to war crimes, violations of international humanitarian law, we're going to take the Israelis' word for it. And that's the policy that we kept for arms transfers that I think Josh probably had firsthand experience with it. And, you still see that reflected publicly when people ask, state or Pentagon spokespeople, hey, what about this killing? What about this potential war crime? And they say, well, the Israelis told us it's fine, or the Israelis are looking into it. And so that was all apparent in October. And I got increasingly angry, increasingly frustrated, decided to put in my resignation. In the Army, it's a very slow process. It takes several months. So I kept doing my job until April. And I think there were maybe other ways to handle it in retrospect, but I was really afraid of what would happen if I said that I had a problem with what we were doing, because nobody else was talking about it. Nobody else was acknowledging it. And the closest thing to an acknowledgement was this, these policy guidance saying, hey, if you're worried about war crimes, we'll ask the Israelis if they're doing war crimes. If they say no, we're good to go. And so it was a very difficult period for me. I think, I won't put words in everyone else's mouth, but by the end, when I finally got out of the office, I was very angry. I was really guilty, and I felt that if I was not doing everything that I could to put this to an end, I was going to regret it for the rest of my life. And so that's why I started speaking about it, which was not my original plan. I kept hoping that the war would end, that you can think of a succession of more outrageous moments over the past year that I think probably some of you like me naively thought was going to make the government change its policy. It did not. And, when we got invited to this, I thought, no way, it's still going to be going on in October, but it is. And I think I've changed my mind or changed my perspective about a few things since then. I think some of them will hopefully be relevant to the students here who are hopefully here because they're considering a career in government or in international relations or something. And at the time I was seeing, oh my God, they looked like they're going to bomb a hospital next week. Everybody knows this. I can't believe nobody's doing anything about it. And for the past 4 months, me, often in conjunction with these wonderful people, have been going on the news, going to panels, going to events like this, and saying, here's what we knew, here's what everybody knows. The administration needs to do something about it. Somebody needs to do something about it. This is outrageous. We can't believe this is happening. And I think the more I thought about it, the more it forced me to reflect on my 13 years in uniform, which I was generally proud of, or I was not particularly conflicted about. And I just felt, wow, finally you've gotten involved in something that is so egregious. You need to do something about it. And I think what I'm thinking about now, even reflecting on the other operations that I participated in, I'll note that I was not in Afghanistan, I was not in Iraq. But what's happening in Gaza, I think, is extraordinary in its severity and publicity, but it's really not extraordinary that the US government is supporting mass killing and displacement of Arabs. And, that's not something I thought about when I was in the Army. And I thought back, okay, counter-smuggling operations in Bahrain, as Professor Abu Nimr mentioned in my bio, well, what was that counter-smuggling for? Part of it was to prevent arms from getting onto the island of Bahrain, and that was to protect the Bahraini monarchy from the Shia majority population that did not like living under kind of an oppressive minoritarian rule imposed by the British and then supported by us. And the other big part of it was in support of the war in Yemen, which was as I think many of you know, a US-backed and prolonged Saudi campaign that also starved a lot of people to death and made a lot of people die of preventable illness and bombed a lot of civilians indiscriminately. And we can go further back in US history to find more examples, but I hadn't even understood that my own career was part of this. And the reason I want to kind of add this context to the horrible crime that's brought us together now is that, it was hurtful for me to acknowledge this, but this is not a one-off event. And there's some peculiarities about the relationship with Israel and the way that pro-Israel, lobby has specific influence, but the fact that we have bipartisan agreement that it's not really a deal breaker if we're going to oversee the death of these people is not new. It's not particularly different, and it made me feel maybe I was a little foolish for making noise all this time and really expecting something to change this quickly. And so I guess I want you, especially those of you who are going to start your career soon or just starting out, to understand that this is also what you're going to be part of. And the chances are you're not going to be on the Israel-Palestine desk. You're not going to touch Gaza. But the chances that you're part of Middle East policy, that's pretty feasible. The chance that you're part of another region where I would just say we are adding weapons and violence. It's not necessarily making it a better place for the people who live there. That's totally possible too. And I'll just conclude by saying it doesn't mean that you shouldn't work in government, you shouldn't work in foreign policy, but you need to be clear-eyed in a way that I really wasn't for most of my career, that this is the institution that you're joining. You are not going to have a choice whether you're on the, to a certain extent, whether you're on the, basically the curing polio desk in this country or the causing polio desk on this country. And that is not a choice that's going to be afforded to most of you. You're going to be assigned where the Excel spreadsheet says they need a person. And what we've discovered, unfortunately, is that most people, when they get on the causing polio desk, do not have the courage or the self-awareness to stop doing that work. So I'll just ask that you think about when you're put in that position, if you stay in government long enough, I think eventually you will be, what you're going to do. Thank you. I have borne mercifully few consequences for the decisions I've taken, but I don't want to, and I would second what Josh said, you'll be amazed at the people who will reach out to you and invite you in if you take this step. It's also scary. I can tell you my girlfriend was not thrilled by the extra amount of time that I'm crashing with her, and we're resolving that shortly. And there will be uncertainty, and I can't promise that will be fun. I think it's absolutely worth it, but it will come at a cost if you do this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your insightful word as well. And I'll comment later on the term foolish. But thank you. Thank you really for your honesty on this one. Lily Greenberg Cole is a former special assistant to the Chief of Staff at the Department of Interior. She has nearly a decade of experience in politics, movement, organizing, and domestic and international human rights work. She worked on President Biden 2020 campaign and served in the administration until May 15, 24, when she became the first Jewish political appointee to resign in protest of U.S. policy in Gaza. Lily grew up doing pro-Israel advocacy with AIPAC and other organizations throughout high school and college, and later became invested in Palestinian rights and Jewish anti-occupation movements. She has appeared as a guest in MSNBC, CNN, NBC, and given commentary on Washington Post, Politico, and Association Press. Lily holds a BA in political science and public policy from the University of California, Berkeley. Lee, the floor is yours. Thank you.
This on? Thank you. You would think I figured this out by now. As Harrison alluded to, we've done a lot of, had a lot of mics. Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Professor Sajjad as well for the work to make this happen, and for everyone who already spoke. I think I think what I'm going to do, I think I'm just going to share my story because I think it addresses all of the questions that were posed to us. And I will certainly talk about consequences. I think maybe I've had, I have taken on a lot of those, and it was a big factor in my decision making that I think is important to talk about. I came to government with a slightly different background than some of the other folks who've resigned. My background is in campaigns and in organizing and in human rights work. So much more. I was a political appointee. I was not on a desk. My desk was to basically manage the Secretary of the Interior and the Chief of Staff, and have a very different kind of view of. When my friends back home would be like, "What is your job?" I would, say, "Have you ever watched The West Wing?" Like that person in a blazer running after their boss with a folder, that's me. So I can't really, what do you do every day? It's different every day. But so that was my role, and I landed there because of my work in campaigns. But I did also have, so my area, what I was working on in government, had nothing to do with Israel-Palestine. It had nothing to do with foreign policy, even though that was something I had a bit of a background in. So it's not necessarily my, area of professional expertise, but this is my life. And what I do have a lot of expertise in does happen to be the Israel lobby, and being Jewish, and that is because I grew up very involved in a Jewish community, where being pro-Israel and being Jewish were inseparable. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Israelism. I highly recommend it. I think it really, that encapsulates the degree to which being pro-Israel is a part of mainstream American Jewish culture. And for me, it was even more than that because I have a lot of family there. I have a lot of friends there. I grew up around a lot of Israelis. I'm a religious person, so for me, this was all connected to like my family, my community, my faith, my culture, connection to the land, not just the state, but the actual place, as a place that is important for me. And ultimately, it's all tied into the thousands of years of Jewish trauma that, culminated in my family coming to the United States to escape persecution. And every single person that I grew up with having a similar story. Right. And so the reason in a lot of ways that being Jewish and being pro-Israel were inseparable, because in that narrative, Israel was about our salvation as a people, our safety as a persecuted people. And that is what I thought of it. That is the story that I knew. That is the narrative that was important to me. And because I was a young person who was interested in politics in my community, it was natural to get involved with AIPAC. I was always a Democrat. I was always a liberal, but it didn't matter because, as Harrison said, this is bipartisan. It was kind of the one thing that people could agree with across the board in my community, because there were plenty of folks who were very conservative. And so I spent a lot of time. In a lot of ways, AIPAC was my first introduction to DC and to the political system and to lobbying. And it, that took me to a career in campaigns, and eventually landed me, as an appointee at a very young age, in a position with a lot of proximity to power, working directly for the person who is eighth in line to the presidency. But by the time I joined the administration, I was thankfully in a different place when it came to Israel, and I kind of re-entering politics after a little hiatus from a different place. I had started to do more work in movement spaces. I had started to, I was a little disillusioned by my time on the campaign trail in 2020, mostly because, as a lot of you may find out, sadly, working for a progressive group does not mean you will be treated progressively, or, with the things that you are fighting for other people. So experiencing that, was a little bit of a downer. And I started to, think about things a little differently from sort of a systems perspective. So I questioned even going into the administration in the first place, because I was involved in all these other spaces, and I consulted with people and came to the conclusion that there's not a lot of folks, especially young people now, who have both experience in electoral politics and in government and in movement work and in activism and advocacy. And I think that's a problem. I think that is one of the reasons why we continue to, we can win in the streets, but we're not winning in the halls of power, because we don't actually have a lot of crossover. And there's a lot of other, reasons for that too. But so that is all the sort of context for me in which October 7th happened. And October 7th happened, and it reverberated through my community. A lot of people that I know lost people that they love. And I spent what felt like about a week accounting for people and waiting to hear about people. And in, a complete communal grief that was then almost immediately for myself and a lot of the Jewish people that I am in community with, out of choice, who are not necessarily the community that I come from, but, we knew that immediately whatever was going to happen in retaliation was going to be probably the worst thing we'd ever seen. And that we didn't really have time to mourn and grieve in the way that we needed to, because we needed to be in the streets and we needed to use our voices to make it very, very clear that we did not want Palestinians to be killed as retaliation for this, and we did not think that that was going to fix anything or solve anything or keep anyone safe. And so I felt that, and was all of a sudden just could not care about any of the other work I was doing, even though it was very important work for the secretary and for all of the things that the work that we do that I was doing at Interior. This was the most important thing to me, and I will say I kind of checked out of my job probably like way before I actually resigned. I don't know that I was very mentally present, but I was very vocal the whole time from October 7th on. One of the emotional what I was experiencing, in part because I didn't go to work for basically a whole week because I said, hey, I have to like deal with my friend's dead village basically, and got so was. Everyone that I worked with was very sympathetic, very understanding, very like expressing their condolences. And then I felt like, a week or two in, or whenever things shifted, and because the violence against Palestinians started almost immediately, I was still not okay and continued to not be okay and continued to say that I was really angry and frustrated. And I wasn't, the reaction was like, it was not the same. And I think it became very clear to me, one, that there were a lot of people that I worked with, and people in White House leadership and people in the administration, very smart people I respected, who did not care about Palestinian lives as much as they said they cared about Israelis. And two, could not imagine that I could care about Palestinians as much as I cared about my friends and family who are Israeli. One of the reasons is because I do have Palestinian friends who I care about very deeply, who live there, who I was very worried about. And two, because I thankfully, have now very much understood that my safety and their safety is not at odds with each other, that it is deeply connected, that if I want the people who are Jewish that I care about in that land to be safe and free and live in peace, the first thing that has to happen is that Palestinians have to have freedom and dignity and full equality. It should not be something that is so crazy to say. I think we all can see that, especially after this year. But yeah, that was clearly so just not even possible for a lot of folks that I worked with to comprehend that I could understand that, and they certainly didn't understand it themselves. And I think, because I was under no illusions, I think this whole time about how the U.S.-Israel relationship works, having spent quite a bit of time in AIPAC land, and that the U.S. was gonna, support Israel's right to defend itself in all of this. I do think I expected a little more human empathy from the administration, especially from someone like Biden, who has sort of campaigned himself as the empathy guy for most of his career. He understands what it's like to have a missing seat at the kitchen table, et cetera. And so to see that really stark, just lack of acknowledgement of Palestinian suffering was incredibly jarring. But I also thought, I had a lot of proximity to power, and I thought I had a lot of privilege as well. I'm Jewish, I'm white. I made it very clear how I felt, and I didn't feel, I felt that if there was any retaliation against me, like that would be a really bad look for the administration. And I know that I felt a lot of privilege to speak up that some of my other colleagues did not. So I was like, I'm gonna run my mouth essentially, and use this proximity. And I also maybe naively thought, hey, the administration is saying, that they're essentially using what happened on October 7th, and they're using Jewish safety and the safety of Jewish Israelis and Jewish Americans even to justify what is being done to Palestinians. And I think I'm a pretty credible source to say, actually, no, that's not true. I don't feel safe. Your actions do not make me feel safe. Israel's actions make me feel less safe. And also, how dare you use the murder of my friends to justify a genocide and the slaughter of so many innocent people. And you can't say I'm anti-Semitic, and you also can't say I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I thought, that might do something at least, right? I felt that it was my responsibility to use all of the channels that were available to me internally, not these sort of formal dissent channels that people have at state, et cetera, but more internal appointee, conversations that lent me a lot of proximity to senior White House staff. And it became very clear to me that the administration was not only not interested in listening, but if anything, they were actually a little maybe afraid of what I had to say. I don't think I internalized that right away because I was like more afraid of them, certainly. But I was very much marked as a troublemaker. And it started to become clear that, there were certain, nothing particularly direct, but I was sacrificing potential future goodwill with people by being honest, and by, sharing what I was feeling and experiencing and feeling. And so that was, I think I thought about resigning back in the winter in a lot of ways. But one, I did feel, okay, I think a lot of us felt this, like it couldn't have, things kept getting worse and worse. And there were moments where it was like, it's certainly going to stop now. It's certainly going to stop now. It certainly has got stop now. That didn't happen. But also, I felt that I really did want to use, I was like, what's the point of all this if I can't do something with it? And if I am one of the few people, especially one of the few Jewish people being very vocal inside the administration, then I need to continue seeing how far I can take this. And I also think I needed to accept the consequences that I knew would happen for me if I were to do something like resign. And even if I did it privately, I think for most, not just Jewish parents, like quitting your job for the president, why would you do that? But honestly, like my grandparents didn't go to college, and here I am 2 generations later. I went to one of the best schools in the country, and I was 26 working for the White House. I think a lot of people in my life don't understand why you would give something like that up, especially because a lot of us very much live with the feeling that, this is all new. And this privilege that we have and this proximity is like, it's very fragile. It could go away at any moment. But I also was grappling with all that. And then outside of my work, I was doing a lot of organizing and was very grateful that I had been kind of in a lot of these spaces of like Jewish Palestinian solidarity work before October 7th. So I could help bring people in and you know, have that as a space for myself. And one of the things that we talk about in some of the analysis in a lot of the Jewish left around the reasons why there is so much US support for Israel, we think about it and, you know, there's like pillars that uphold US support for Israel. I think about 4. One of them is the American Jewish community, and that's what we're responsible for as American Jews, because we need to get our people right. But that's just one of 4 pillars, and the other 3 are really strong. One of them is Christian Zionism, which a lot of people don't actually know that much about, but there are more Christian Zionists than there are Jews in the United States. AIPAC, which is, you know, masquerades as a Jewish organization, is actually their managing director is a Christian Zionist. There's also CUFI, Christians United for Israel. A lot of the reason why support for Israel is such a part of the American narrative is because of Christian Zionism and because of, you know, the rapture and ultimately, you know, an idea that doesn't care about Jews or Muslims or Arabs at all. And then there's US military interests, and of course, the military-industrial complex that benefits from war and death and violence, specifically of non-white people. So there's all these 4 pillars, and they're kind of covered by this curtain of Jewish safety, because it's way more palatable to say to people, we support Israel because we're protecting a historically persecuted minority group of people, than to say, we actually want them to be there so that everyone can die and then Jesus can come back, or because we want our stock to, you know, go up. People aren't going to like be as excited about that. So one of the things that we talk about in Jewish organizing around this is, you know, that our job is to kind of rip that curtain off and show the real reasons. And I had a moment where I realized I no longer had any more power inside to change anything. But what I did have the power to do in this moment was to rip that curtain off in a really public way. And once I realized that, you know, if I could do something that could even like in the long run, maybe not in the short term, but in the long run contribute to a change in the status quo, I was morally obligated to do that, because ultimately, you know, that is what I think we are. You know, we are obligated to make those choices as people, but also in particular to me, that is what being Jewish is about and what I was taught to do. So I am going to try and wrap this up, but that is essentially what brought me here to now. I'll say, like, I'll echo that. I think, you know, doors close, but a lot of doors open up, and I do think you doing the right thing does lead you to, like, you know, does lead to other opportunities, professional opportunities, et cetera. You find your people and people that your values aligned with. Personally, you know, I have certainly isolated myself from like the majority of the American Jewish community. I think that will change though one day. And I think I'm not the only person that has done that. And I think there are a lot of us who are grappling with this, but we understand too, you know, what I am hopeful is that eventually those people will realize that this is for them as well, because it is. And they might not realize that now, but I, you know, it has been incredibly challenging, but I do have a lot of people, some of them at this table, to go through that with. And I definitely, as Harrison said, I think it's worth it. I would 100 times worth it. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Lily, for this testimony. Thank you. Thank you again. Tariq Habash is most recently served as a political appointee and public and policy advisor in the U.S. Department of Education Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development. Tariq led the policy office's students' loan portfolio, regulatory policy planning, and budget development across higher education issues. He was the second government official and the first political appointee to publicly resign from the Biden administration due to the policy on Gaza and unrestricted support of Israel aggression against Palestinians. Prior to joining the government, Tariq was a co-founder of the Student Borrower Protection Center, a national research and advocacy nonprofit where he led the organization's investigative work on students' loan and consumer finance policy. He also spent years working at the Century Foundation, specializing in higher education affordability, accountability, and equal issue. Tariq holds degree from Harvard Graduate School of Education and the University of Miami. Thank you, Tariq.
Thank you, Professor Abou-Nimer. So for those who don't know me, my name is Tariq Habash. I'm a Palestinian American. I grew up my whole life living here in the United States, and I grew up in Southwest Ohio, in a town some of you may have heard of recently, Middletown, Ohio, because I went to the same high school as J.D. Vance, fun fact. We had a lot of the same teachers, did not know him personally, so I can't answer any fun questions about the senator. But what I will say is I grew up in a small town, a steel town in a blue collar community, in a state that is very diverse, and in a town that has really, really disparate opportunities based on the communities that you're part of. And for me, coming from as a first generation American, but coming from a Palestinian family, my family always instilled for me that education was critical to not just my future, but to my livelihood, to what it means to be a Palestinian, because my grandparents were forcibly expelled from their homes in 1948 during the Nakba. They lost everything. They lost their things. They lost their loved ones. They lost family members. They lost friends. They lost their clothes. And the only things that they were able to retain were the knowledge in their brain and the love in their heart. And so for me, I approached every day growing up in that small town in Southwest Ohio, focused on the things that I could keeping that love, keeping the friendships that I had, and keeping the knowledge, the education that I would bring into my life. And I wanted to make sure that all people had those same opportunities. And so I spent the rest of my life working on education issues, because I really believe that we live in a society where we have to help vulnerable people. We have to help people who are less fortunate than us because of the circumstances that they are in. And that's not just people here in the United States, but that's all around the world. And as the richest, wealthiest country in the world that has the ability to provide the resources and support to people around the world, it was critical that we do that work. And it was an honor to be able to be part of the Department of Education, whose mission is really focused on providing equal access to education to all Americans, and to do so in a way that it was competitive and high quality education on a global stage. And I approached that job every single day for 3 years with the knowledge that I was doing work to help millions of Americans have better access to improving the educational opportunities for all students. And like you heard, I was in the policy office. Before being in the Department of Education, I spent years writing policy papers, analyses, briefs, regulatory comments about, what our education system looked like. I was a nerd. I was also an advocate, because it was really important to me that we connect the policies and the work that's happening to real people and to how people are affected by those policies. And so when I was doing that work, I really believed that hearing from people, real people, every single day would make an impact and inform the work they were doing. And I brought that to the Department of Education. I brought that to the work that we were doing. And I was not part of the the actual work that was happening post October 7th on what was affecting Palestinians, affecting my family and friends overseas. And I was reminded this, by the way, by the secretary, who was like, we're at the Department of Education. We don't do foreign policy. And you guys are in SIS. You're smart people. I think you probably could have figured that out as well. But I was part of the political apparatus. And so for me, I had friends across the administration. I was like part of the nexus point for interagency work for the Department of Education. I had colleagues who I worked with every single day in the Office of Management and Budget in the White House, at the Domestic Policy Council, the National Economic Council. I had colleagues at the Department of Labor, Department of State, who I worked on federal policy issues. And I said, like, let's reach out to these people. I have these relationships. What else am I going to use it for? We're watching some really horrific stuff happening in the world, and it's affecting people who look like me. I'm seeing people with my name in the lists of children that are being killed. Like, I can't tell you how dehumanizing it is to see someone whose name is Tariq. Like, in the United States, I probably met half a dozen Tariqs before October 7th, because I grew up in Southwest Ohio. There aren't that many people with my name in the Midwest that you get to meet. And seeing dozens of Tariqs be killed and be on like the list of names that the ministry was reporting as these are deaths this week, these are deaths this week, there's a level of dehumanization that like you just don't realize exists until that happens. And then to know that your boss, the president of the United States, also is willing to say that, you know what, like these are the reported numbers, but we don't really know if they're accurate. To hear like in a meeting with the National Security Council that there is intelligence that we have that we can't share that says that there's a military base in this hospital and the Israelis have to go in, they have to invade this hospital that is filled with children who are in NICUs because they don't have the ability to breathe on their own. To hear that in the White House for a meeting with political appointees, it was too hard to bear. And so when we talk about, I think your first question was about what the reason was, what's the why? The why was because as a Palestinian American, it did not feel like I could continue to do the work that I was tasked to do, the work that I took an oath to do for the American people. It did not feel possible to continue to do that work while our government was not working in the interests of Americans or in the interests of civilians around the world. And even though my work did not directly connect with what was happening, I was still a representative of that political apparatus, of that administration that was signing off on those policies. And regardless of the conversations I had with people who had real power, the Secretary of Education would tell me, like, I don't get to tell Secretary Blinken what to do on foreign policy, and he doesn't get to tell me what to do on education. But you know what? You are the one that was okay with the Department of Education putting out communications about what was happening in real time. But you didn't say anything about how Israel was destroying universities in Gaza. To this date, it's been over a year. Every single university has been at least partially destroyed by US weapons and tax dollars and by the Israeli military. And the Department of Education has been silent. If we care about education, we have to call out scholasticide at least, right? And these conversations, despite the secretary and the chief of staff and the assistant secretary talking to me on a consistent basis about how I was doing personally, despite checking in on me to make sure that my mental health was okay, that my family was safe, there was no willingness to actually engage with the reality of what our political system was doing to people who looked like me, who had names similar to mine. And that was untenable as a political representative. So when I decided to resign was fairly early on. but I also recognize the consequences that could happen. And it was important to me both to make sure, especially as a Palestinian, because, and respectfully to my colleagues here, who took huge sacrifices, I don't think that they necessarily had to weigh the same realities that I was thinking about. As a brown person, as a Palestinian, as someone who wasn't working on the issues early on, to say, I'm resigning because this thing I have absolutely no control over, like my parents were like, you're crazy. Who's going to listen to you? Who cares that you working on student loans and on higher education stuff, like it's not going to make a difference, but it's going to make your life a lot harder, because no one will hire you, because people will just silence you, because that's what has always happened to us. And we had a lot of conversations, me with my family, because it was important for them to understand why I could not continue to do that work. And I had these conversations with my supervisor, with the assistant secretary, and I said, like, I care about the work we're doing. We do really important work. I don't know if you guys have seen all the work the Department of Education has done over the last 4 years, but it's been the most active administration and collective policy effort to improve education that I've ever seen, not just in my lifetime, but dating back to the creation of the Department of Education and the passage of the Higher Education Act. There's been incredible steps to actually make higher education in particular more affordable and accessible to students, and to address the growing student debt crisis. All of those things are great. But at the same time, there's so much more work that needs to happen across all of the issues that we collectively care about. And we can't say, listen, you're doing good stuff here, and so we're gonna ignore the bad stuff too. We have to take responsibility for everything that we're doing. And that was extremely important. That was something that I had to communicate. And I said, is there a way for me to continue to be part of this good work that we're doing and not be politically aligned? And there was really no appetite for that. And I think there was an expectation that you're just going to fall in line. It's okay. This is out of your control. And so at some point you'll be able to just take a step back and say, I did what I could. I raised my voice. Now I'm going to be a good soldier and move on. But for me, this is life or death for so many people. So many other people have made huge sacrifices, not just in Gaza, by the way. There are Americans who have sacrificed their own lives to make the political point that what we are doing is absolutely wrong. And so me sacrificing my job it's pennies. And being willing to do that and being able to communicate that that is part of the work that we do, I recognize that there are consequences. I recognize that I've received hate. I've gotten threatening emails. I've gotten threatening attacks on social media. That is minuscule in comparison to the harms that continue to befall on Palestinians in Gaza, on Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, on Lebanese continuing to see the growing regional expansion of this genocide, because our unwillingness to actually use any of our political leverage, any of the conditionality that we could apply to the weapons that we continue to provide. And so for me, as someone who works on policy, as someone who is part of the legal conversations with our general counsel's office, with White House counsel about exactly how we were going to follow the letter of the law when it came to canceling student loans, and why we were doing so in such a technocratic way that we could actually stay within the confines of the law, and yet seeing how blatantly we were willing to ignore the law when it comes to providing weapons to Israel, it was untenable. And it was very clear that I could no longer stay, and I had to take a step back. And so my advice to you is always knowing what your absolute line is, especially as you're going into this really gray area of work. I think we've heard this from pretty much every single person here, but it's important to know what you stand for, what you care about, and what you're willing to sacrifice when it comes down to it, because ultimately we're all trying to make the world a better place, but we also have to be aware of the realities of the work that we do, particularly when we go into government.
you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. So timing seem to be a place to struggle with. When do you say no? When do you step out? The issue of dehumanization of Palestinian or the reduced value of Arab lives also was common. A third one is the ethics of connecting policy with people. And the fourth one, that there are consequences. And it seemed that they are manageable. That's the message we're getting. Scary, but manageable more than what we think. So thank you for those 4 points. I want to quickly open it to the discussion, comments, and the questions. Please make sure that you have your comments or questions brief so we can use the 20 minutes or so that we have in a productive way. Thank you. And I will take from the 2 wings. So yeah, 1, 2, and we'll stop with Irene, the 3 from this side. We'll take them together and then we'll take another round from the left side. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much. I'd like to thank everyone who made this possible, all the panelists. My name is Ingrid Monkevich. I'm a local activist, and I'm so glad that some of you touched on the importance of keeping records and doing whatever you can in whatever position you are. This year, a group of colleagues and I have been trying to work to force the UN to take stronger action. And we've realized that we're part of like older people and we don't have contacts with a lot of the students. The students seem very focused on divestment and such, but students here in the district have a unique opportunity they could even go in person to the embassies, which some of us old people did in January when we went, and very, luckily South Africa did take action, but there's more that can happen. There's something called Resolution 371, Uniting for Peace. And by this means, the General Assembly can override the veto that we have in the Security Council. Now, I've been told by certain student relay contacted activists that, well, they don't have any use for the UN. It's not worth their time. But nevertheless, you could get it on record for history that they did this Uniting for Peace, whereby if the Security Council is not fulfilling its obligation, the General Assembly can override them. And any member of the Assembly can introduce this. So I wanted to
Thank you.
make you know that.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Yes, please.
Hi there. It's nice to meet you all. I'm Michaela Mitzenmacher. I did both my undergrad here and I'm currently a grad student. And I guess this is kind of like 2 questions in one, but when I was an undergrad, I didn't intern for any government organizations, but I kind of was told, the experience matters even if it doesn't align with your politics. And I interned for 2 different organizations, which I really disavow and would never work for again today. And even though I can justify it with it was for getting experience, I do sometimes feel a lot of guilt, especially for one of them, which I'm not going to disclose here, but if you want to ask, I'll say what organization it was. So I guess my first question is, how do you deal with the guilt surrounding, working for something which you vehemently oppose? And the other question I had was during my gap year, I made the commitment to actually do work for something I politically agree with. And I actually, during the second half, volunteered in the West Bank, helping Palestinians in a very direct way in villages. And I made a lot of close friends there I'm still with. But the point I'm getting at is now that I'm back in the US, I kind of have a feeling of powerlessness because I'm not as directly able to, be there and, record and any instances of violences that settlers took against them. And I guess the issue is I'm going to get emotional, but I worry about them every day. And I just have this very powerless feeling, when I get a text from a really good friend of mine who lives in one of the villages. I mean, she says they're doing okay right now, but I just worry when I see any images come out of Gaza and Jenin that it could be them next. So I just want to know how you deal with that emotionally. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. You're fantastic, Irene, in the back. Thank you.
Can we respond to that?
Just one.
Oh, one more.
Take the three.
Hi there. Thanks for being here. I'm a Palestinian professor here at American University, and I guess I'm thinking about in the context and continuum of an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians that did not begin this year, and in the context of the deeply entrenched anti-Palestinianism in U.S. government, and the fact that Israeli crimes did not begin this year. And I'm thinking about the continuum of violence in this part of the world and the US imperialist policies in this part of the world. The idea of red lines, I think itself is a problematic politics that we could talk about. But thinking about this political continuum of ethnic cleansing that does not begin now, and how one formulates the decision to resign as a political act now. And I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering if you could speak to maybe if your decisions or how they might have been informed by the wider social context of intense public pressure that our leadership has been put under by grassroots organizers, for example, that mobilize thousands of calls towards a representative, but especially to our student intifada across the country that imposed a kind of clarity, political clarity, a moral and ethical obligation that engendered certain kinds of responses in different kinds of ways. And so I think that rendered a visibility, a global visibility that would put also a shame on those potentially connected to this moment in a different kind of way. So I guess my question is, could you speak to if your decision was also made in reference to the social pressures that came in this moment, especially from our students, and many of them that are in this room right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a comment and 2.5 questions, or 3, you could say. So I would give the floor. Go ahead, Tariq.
Yeah, I just want to quickly answer the second question, or I guess the first question after the first comment.
Please.
Just with respect to feeling guilty about working places that, may not fully align with where you are. I have a younger sister who I talk to about this all the time, but the reality is that nowhere is perfect. You are always going to run into situations in your place of employment, in your daily life, where you might disagree with the people who you are collaborating with, interacting with. It shouldn't prevent you or shouldn't make you feel guilty about continuing to try to make that place better. And so I think that is a really important point to make. Your presence there can help make them understand, to be more sympathetic, more empathetic with a particular community or in the work that is being done. Don't discount that. I think with respect to being in the federal government, it felt a little bit different, especially as part of the political apparatus, after exhausting absolutely every single avenue that I could. And so resigning felt like the only option for me, and I guess also for my colleagues. But I will also say that doesn't mean that everyone should feel obligated to resign. I think we've all said this at one point or another. You don't expect the mailman to resign, but the mailman provides a really critical function in our government. And so, there's always important people doing important work, and we shouldn't discount that. I'll hand it off to my colleagues.
Really quickly, I just want to say that you have a lot of power here to change what's happening on the ground in Palestine. And I very much understand, and similarly have people that I'm very, very worried about and feel guilty. I mean, I shouldn't be there. So, feel like maybe direct action, but systemically, you have more power here, at least right now. And you should use that, and you should channel that all of those things that you're experiencing into organizing work. Because we here in the United States, like our taxes and our government are the reason why this is continuing to happen. And so like it is, yeah, I just want to, I'm happy to talk more afterwards too, about ways that you can, get involved in a more tangible way. But you should let that guilt be a, fire under you to do something, because your voice here in some ways is more important than protective presence over there.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's okay. Y'all can hear me. First, just Michaela, thank you for your vulnerability there. And I think Louise answered your question well, but yeah, there's a lot of people who would do anything to have the access that we have, even you, just because you're in the city.
Yeah.
And this, unfortunately, this conflict or this genocide is going to be solved in Washington. This is the only place where we can possibly put this to an end. To the professor, I don't know if I got your name in the back, who asked a really good question about how did we decide this was our red line. I think that's a good question.
Can you use the mic for accessibility? Just
Yes, absolutely.
not.
Yes. Okay, well, good one. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, was in the Army 6 months ago for most of my adult life, and we have a complex about not using microphones because we're proud of projecting our voices. But no, I want to touch on the red lines question, which is a real one, and I think I have been asked that before. It's like, well, why was wrong things were happening before? You were participating in wrong things before. For me, I joined. I commissioned as an Army officer when I was 22. I didn't look at the world at all the same way that I do now. It took a long time to kind of get to where I am, but I will specifically say I started making the decision like, hey, I'm actually going to speak out about this in April, and I was figuring out how to do it. I was very worried about what the blowback would be. I was continually looking for opportunities to back down. I was like, oh, maybe the war will end. Maybe this thing will happen. We don't have to do it. And yeah, I think May is when the student protests began, or at least made the news. And I did feel, I was like, okay, these 19-year-olds are getting beat up and tear gas for this. So how are you going to stay quiet when they're putting themselves on the line? So I will say, yes, I saw it and made a difference. I think the others may have been affected in similar ways. Miriam, do you want to speak on this? But yes, I saw it, it affected me, and it drove me to action.
Yeah, so I have spoken many times about how the student movement played a part in my decision. I think like just in general, seeing students take the stance that they did to call for divestment for their universities, like although me resigning wasn't necessarily the same thing, like I just felt it was important for those of us in the workforce to also advocate. I think that like there's so much power there with your labor and obviously, like I think the workforce is a much larger population than the student population. So it really, I think it pushed me to think about, okay, what should I be doing as someone who's graduated, who has this career, and I would really kind of like. I want to see more of that. I want to see more of individuals in the workforce recognizing their power. I think that. I think Josh brought it up earlier. There's maybe an idea that you're too junior to have anything be done. Like essentially, you're too junior for it to matter, or for your opinion and stance to be heard. And certainly, like I'm sure I felt that way while I was working in that job. But at the same time, I think the student movement showed me it doesn't really matter your age or your experience or whatever. I think just any kind of group of people banding together and making their voice heard on the issue is incredibly important.
Yeah, just two quick things. First of all, on UN Uniting for Peace, yes, of course the UN is important, right? If it wasn't important, the US wouldn't be vetoing resolutions. And, you know, I mean, the US support for Israel at the UN is one of the key pillars of diplomatic support and cover that we provide to Israel. And if the UN wasn't important, you wouldn't have a resolution introduced last week by Senator Risch, or at least that's going to be introduced when they come back into session by Senator Risch and 20 other senators, to defund the UN if it removes Israel from certain positions. And I think that's a good point. I hadn't thought of the idea that students in this town could actually be going to embassies. I think that's a great idea. On red lines, I think that is I understand your question and where it's coming from. It has been my view since I worked in Ramallah in 2008, 2009, that the path Israel is on and the path the West Bank is on is one of ethnic cleansing. And so your question of why is anything a red line, or how can there be such a thing as a legitimate red line? I don't want to paraphrase what you're saying, but I think that's basically what you were asking. Isn't everything a red line? I think for me, as I was working not only on this issue, but on a lot of issues, the red line was not so much a substantive one as a conditions-based one. And that condition was, can I make a difference? That condition was, you know, recognizing that I, as a person in government, whether a junior person or later in my career, you know, mid-level, slightly more senior, whatever it might be, on an issue like this or on any issue in government, you know, you're not going to turn the ship of state, right? I mean, the metaphor here is a aircraft carrier that takes 8 miles to come to a stop. I would ask you, Harrison, but you're Army, not Navy, so you can't fact check me there. So I'll stick with the Navy metaphor, so you can't fact check me. But literally, right, you cannot just turn the ship of state overnight. And as a civil servant, you're not going to turn the ship of state. In fact, you know, the way I always thought of it is I'm not the ship, I'm not the rudder. The best I can hope to be is water pushing against the rudder in the hope that over time things shift. And on that basis, I felt that there were a lot of debates and a lot of discussions, including in conditions where there was a lot of harm being done by the United States, in which it was worth me staying because I could make a difference. I could make things incrementally better. And I think in government, I was an incrementalist. I didn't think that things are ever going to change overnight, but I didn't think I was ever going to be in a position to change them overnight. So what's the best I can do is keep pushing. And for me, the red line was not what the US government did, but what I was personally unable to do. And that was to raise these concerns and to have an impact. And it's when I, for the first time in my career, having worked in Iraq, having worked on arms transfers to Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, having worked on a whole variety of complex issues, came to an issue where for the first time, there was absolutely no space to do anything. And even on Israel before last year, there had been space to push a little bit, to raise issues, to shift bureaucratic processes. That's what disappeared. And that for me was the red line, was my inability to make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please. 1 and 2 and 3. Where? Nazarina? I guess we'll start from 3 to 2 to 1.
Thanks, everybody. It's been very, very interesting and invaluable. I'm Carl Polzer. I work on inequality. I analyze it and I advocate for the bottom 50%. And I've been very vocal on this issue. Also, my grandparents escaped from Hitler's Germany. One was a political activist, one was Jewish, and they would identify with a refugee. So what I'd like to ask about is concrete steps. Like you have this, people are being killed. There's a genocide going on. There's ethnic cleansing going on. So when I've advocated on Capitol Hill, what about some more concrete asks? What do we want? How can we stabilize this? So it's clear to me, I mean, I don't expect you to agree. We need some kind of international force in Gaza to have the Israelis leave Gaza. They need protection from the rebuilding of some kind of terror group there. And then there needs to be some longer, there obviously needs to be rebuilding, and possibly not just with the business going to Israeli contractors. There needs to be the whole society rebuilt. And maybe you can't do the West Bank with Gaza together all at once. What concrete things can you go to ask? What do we in the next year or two, people on the Hill? And along those lines, is that?
Yes, thank you. Very clear. Thank you. Number two here in front of you.
Hi, thank you so very much for coming. My name is Tina, and I'm an SIS alumna. And I worked for 3 years with the Fulbright Foreign Student Program to bring Palestinian graduate students to the United States. So I have a lot of direct connection to all of this. I wanted to ask more of a structural question, given that all of you have experience inside the bureaucracy. Recently, there was reported that several inspectors general are investigating on behalf of individuals who've expressed their discontent internally. And I wonder if any of you have insight as to whether or not that might actually create some cracks in the political wall that this issue is facing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, ma'am.
Thank you. Whoa, sorry. My name's Ann Broom. I'm just an average American citizen. First, I want to thank you all for your integrity. Irrespective of views one way or another, personal integrity is a remarkable thing, and I appreciate it. Secondly, I wanted to ask, and I think you all are making a difference. I wanted to state that too, because I think now it's incremental, as you said, but I think at the very least, there's a discomfort with what's going on that wasn't there a year ago. So thank you for that. And now I wanted to ask about the media. I know that, again, a year ago, your voices, your type of voices were anathema in the media, except as maybe sort of, oddities to be exploited for sensationalism. Are you seeing any light at the tunnel? Are you seeing some openness now to media representation in a more fair and, balanced kind of way as to Palestinian interests? So thank you again.
Thank you. So we have 3 more questions. Anyone would care to start with the brief responses? Good, thank you.
All right, we'll go the other way down the line this time. So briefly, let me see. Solid recommendations. I mean, yes, I think, clearly, I think an international presence would be one of many good ideas. The problem you have is that Israel is never going to go for that. And for as long as Israel isn't willing to go for that, the US is never going to go for that. And so I think we remain stuck, frankly, in a downward spiral. I think the urgent asks are, this week we've seen the Israeli Knesset pass a law to ban UNRWA operations. I think that is an area that is very urgent for the US and for Congress to work on. There is something in Congress, the UNRWA Restoration Act, which would restore US funding to UNRWA. But let's be honest, we're coming into a lame duck period. It's not going to pass. We'll see what the, conditions coming out of the election are, and what the next administration and the next Congress look like. But I think the best we can do is I would say keep creating the space for this discussion and this debate, and then let's see what opportunities emerge. I think to go in with a list of demands right now is quite difficult, honestly. I think it's more about getting the space, getting the members willing to address these issues. I'm sorry to say that because I know it doesn't sound like much. That's where we are. And Tarek and I will be happy to talk to you about our effort to change that. OIG report, yes. So Washington Post reported that there are a bunch of Inspector General reports coming up from state and DoD. I would say don't get your hopes up. On the state side, one of those reports already came out and was to use government talk and nothing burger. There are a few other reports in the process. I understand that on the DoD side, it may be a little bit stronger than it has been so far on the state side. But don't expect anything significant to come out of those. Don't expect them to come out anytime soon necessarily, although if Trump wins, they may rush some of them out so that they at least get them out. But I don't think that's going to be the difference because, as Mariam said, and as Tarek said, what we have is a political problem, not a policy problem. The policy prescriptions, the policy solutions are clear. It is the political obstacles. And then very finally, on the media piece, what I will say on that is I do want to be clear. Yes, I fully agree that there has been a repression of voices in the media, a repression of representation in the media. a lack of a balance in the media, an unwillingness to give voice, particularly to the Palestinian reporters who are in Gaza right now in the media. I do want to also say that, in my experience, the problem is not the reporters. There are some amazing reporters, including at CNN, at the New York Times, at the Washington Post, and the BBC, the Guardian, even Fox News. There are some great reporters out there. The problem is the publishers, the editors, and that's where you hit the issue. And just to give a brief example of that, I was talking to a friend who is an editor at a national media outlet recently, who said, every time we say anything vaguely critical of Israel, the next day we get 100 phone calls. Each of them has to go to our ombudsman, who has to look at each of those reports and has to assess whether they are fair, and then has to write a report about it. When we say something that is biased against the Palestinians, the phone doesn't ring. So this is a media problem. This is a money problem. It is also an us problem, because we are not organized in the way that is necessary to engage with the media ecosystem as it exists in this country. And so that's something that we need to work on.
I think that I'm speaking to the media question. I think there's definitely a valuing of certain voices over others, and it's very clear. But I do think it's slowly shifting a little bit. I think there was a piece in the New York Times about I think it was the Israeli military using Palestinians as human shield or something of that nature. So I think it's slowly getting there. I think it's dependent on continuing public pressure to, showcase that there is the sense of the public wanting the media to report things differently. I also think within our own framing, I think it's incredibly important for when we're talking about Israel-Palestine to not reduce it to starting on October 7th. I think, the professor who was here earlier said that it's been a decades long issue. So I think it's important for us as a general public to frame it that way. It's important for the media to frame it that way.
Just one quick thing to add to the gentleman here. I had two good questions about what to ask Congress for. So I think after the election, a few senators, Tim Kaine, Bernie Sanders, introducing joint resolutions of disapproval. Some of you are nodding like you already know this. That's wonderful. But basically, this is a measure that allows them to skip a lot of normal procedural steps and force a vote in the Senate to restrict certain arms sales to Israel. They're all offensive weapons. Can talk later about what offensive weapons means, but they're what Congress thinks offensive weapons are: tank shells, bomb kits, etc. So that, for those of you who do engage Congress, especially the Senate, that's a very important ask. And Josh touched on restoration, probably won't pass. If this stuff doesn't pass, but it still gets a unprecedented or unexpected amount of support, that's still important, especially in a Harris presidency, because these are otherwise legislators she will need to depend on. And it does matter if a surprising number of them have demonstrated that they are interested in putting some serious pressure on Israel. And I just want to mention put a finer point on the question about options for day after, though I hate that term, in Gaza. I think the reality is, if it's not something that is either tacitly or explicitly led by the people who live there, it's not going to succeed. And that's not a political ideological statement. It just means, the administration plans that we're going to have Emirati troops fleecing Hamas fighters is nonsensical. And as Josh indicated, that's a very tough pill to swallow for both the administration and the Israeli government, who've said, well, we can't have Hamas governing. It's going to be some people who used to work for Hamas governing, and we can call it a different name. Maybe that's like my most hopeful solution. And international actors can complement that, but ultimately there's no getting around the people who have been ruling Gaza for recent history.
Tariq, any final word?
Yeah, just really quickly on the direct action piece, and this is a shameless plug to what Josh had kind of alluded to, and Lily kind of talked about this as well, is there's a need for us to be more organized, to build our political power in this moment in particular because of how horrific everything has been related to Gaza, to Palestine and Israel. And the reality is, we've been saying this over and over, it's a political problem. It's not primarily a policy problem. It is a policy problem, but there are some brilliant academics, researchers, organizations who have been developing real policy solutions, and we know what those are. Those are not outside of our grasp. It is not that complicated of an issue that we can't figure it out. What is the problem is that there's a real political barrier that is preventing our elected officials, our government leaders from actually taking the steps to work in our own American national interests, as well as in the interests of Palestinians and Israelis. And also, frankly, there's this barrier that prevents us from aligning our policies with our own American values. And we have to actually recenter the work. We have to make sure that we are working towards that. So Josh and I started just a couple of weeks ago, we publicly launched a new lobbying organization. It's called A New Policy. The idea is that we will bring Americans across the country, regardless of identity, background, political affiliation, because this is an issue that spans political ideology. This is an issue that is centered on our American values and our American interests. And it's something that we need to start working on today. It's something that we frankly need to be building every single day if we want to have a real impact and centering it on that. I think all of us can really be part of an effort to really shift American politics in a way that it does prioritize our interests and not the interests of the military industrial complex, insofar as those interests are misaligned with our own. Designing our politics and our policies in a way that it is not in the interests of the right wing of the Israeli regime that continues to oppress Palestinians, but is actually designed in a way that it is both in the interests of the people in the region and also our own interests. So
thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. I'd like to thank you for your honesty, for your integrity, and also for your bravery. And despite that there was a thread of pain in your in your 5 introductions and remarks, and you sort of caution us, but at the same time, I'm leaving it with a sense of inspiration. And thank you for your modeling for us and for many people who work in peace, that it's possible to speak up and to stand and deal with the consequences. We're really honored to be with you here in this panel. And thank you for all of your, for those who stayed with us. I think they still have a few minutes to stay with you. We are out of time. So thank you. Thank you.